"Excuse me, Mum, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. The front rows are reserved for our legacy donors and invited dignitaries. And looking at you, well, I think you'd be much more comfortable in the overflow standing section near the parking lot." Those words didn't just hang in the humid air of the Oakbridge Academy football field. They sliced right through it like a razor. To private security guards, hired specifically for this graduation ceremony, stood with their arms crossed, blocking the path of a woman who looked like she'd just walked off a construction site because, frankly, she had. Sarah Jenkins didn't look like the other mothers in the crowd. She wasn't wearing a pastel sundress or a wide-brimmed hat to block out the June sun. And she certainly wasn't wearing shoes that cost more than a mortgage payment. Sarah was wearing her Sunday best, which was a clean pair of dark denim jeans, polished work boots that had seen 10 years of oil changes, and a surplus military field jacket that was slightly too big for her narrow shoulders. She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She just clutched the crumpled program in her hand, the one that listed her son, Leo Jenkins. As the valedictorian and looked at the guards with eyes that were tired, ancient, and undeniably steady. "My son is speaking today," she said, her voice low, like the rumble of a distant engine. "I have a ticket for seat for A, right there." Before the guard could answer, a shadow fell over them. It was Victoria St. Clair, the president of the Oakbridge Booster Club, a woman who treated the high school like her own private kingdom. Victoria adjusted her designer sunglasses and offered Sarah a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. "Oh, Sarah," she sighed, loud enough for the nearby parents to hear. "It's not about the ticket, sweetie. It's about the aesthetic. We're live streaming this year. We just want the front row to look cohesive. You understand, don't you? It's for the children." Sarah understood. She understood that in a town like Oakbridge, where old money paved the streets and new money built the gates, a woman who ran a solo mechanic shop out of a converted barn didn't fit the aesthetic. She understood that even though her son had the highest GPA in the school's history, she was still the woman with grease permanently etched into her cuticles. So, she did what she had done for 18 years. She swallowed her pride for the sake of her boy. She nodded, turned around, and let the guards escort her away from the stage, past the rows of padded chairs, all the way to the back, behind the bleachers, where the view was obscured by a chain-link fence and the smell of the dumpster was ripe in the heat. If you've ever been told you don't belong, not because of what you did but because of who you are, then you know exactly how Sarah felt in that moment. It's a cold burn, but stick around because in about 20 minutes, Victoria St. Clair and her cohesive front row are going to learn a lesson about respect that they will never, ever forget. Sarah found a spot on a rusty metal bench near the concession stand. She could barely see the podium, just a speck in the distance, but she could hear the speakers crackle to life. She smoothed the front of her field jacket, her fingers tracing the outline of a hidden patch sewn on the inside lining, right over her heart. It was a habit, a reminder to understand why Sarah sat there without fighting back. You have to understand the war she'd already fought. Sarah wasn't from Oakbridge. She came from the Ridge, about 30 miles and a tax brackets away. She met her husband, Mike, when they were 20. He was a wildland firefighter, the kind of guy who ran toward the smoke when everyone else was running away. They were happy, broke, and unbreakable. But fire doesn't care about love. When Leo was 4, the wind shifted on a ravine fire, and Mike didn't make it out. Sarah was left with a toddler, a mortgage, and a talent for fixing engines that she picked up from her dad. She moved closer to the city for better schools for Leo, renting a rundown garage with a small apartment upstairs. She became the grease witch of Oakbridge. That's what the locals called her. If your Mercedes started making a funny noise, you took it to the dealership. But if your old truck wouldn't start at 4 a.m. in a blizzard, you called Sarah. She worked 16-hour days, smelling like diesel and coffee, just to pay the tuition for Oakbridge Academy because she promised Mike she'd give their boy the best. But keeping Leo in that school was like swimming upstream in a river of concrete. The other moms shunned her. The teachers looked through her. When Leo was 10, the school counselor suggested he might be happier at a vocational school, implying he wasn't cut out for academics. Sarah had walked into that office, slammed her greasy hands on the mahogany desk, and said, "My son stays, and he will outperform every child in this building." And he did. Leo didn't just study. He devoured knowledge. He worked at the garage with her on weekends, doing calculus homework on the fender of a '69 Mustang. But there was another chapter to Sarah's life, a secret chapter that the Victoria St. Clairs of the world couldn't see. 5 years ago, Sarah needed extra money for Leo's college fund. She saw a vague ad in the paper looking for civilian contractors with expert tracking and wilderness survival skills for a government training facility up in the Cascades. Sarah had grown up hunting in those mountains. She knew the terrain better than she knew her own backyard. She applied, thinking it was for a search and rescue team. It wasn't. It was SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. The military hired civilians to act as the hunter force. The job was simple: specialized units, Green Berets, Rangers, elite operators were dropped into the wilderness with nothing but a knife and a map. Sarah's job was to catch them. Most of the civilian trackers were retired law enforcement or hunters who made a lot of noise. Sarah was a ghost. She moved through the underbrush without snapping a twig. During her first rotation, she was assigned to track a squad of 6 Green Berets. These were the best of the best, men trained to be invisible. Sarah caught them in 12 hours. She didn't use tech. She used intuition. She saw where the moss was disturbed, smelled the faint chemical scent of their bug repellent, noticed the birds going quiet in a specific sector. When she walked into their camp while they were sleeping, tapped the squad leader on the shoulder, and handed him a cup of coffee from her thermos, they nearly jumped out of their skins. The squad leader was a massive man named Commander Hayes. After the initial shock wore off, he didn't get angry. He got curious. "Who taught you to move like that?" he asked. "Poverty," Sarah had answered simply. "When you can't afford to miss the deer, you learn to be quiet." They nicknamed her the Wraith. For 3 summers, Sarah returned to the facility. She stopped being the opposition and started being an instructor. She taught these elite warriors how to read the land like a book. She taught them that the loudest thing in the woods is usually your own ego. And then came the incident at Ravine for It was a live fire extraction drill, meant to be routine. But nature doesn't respect drills. A flash flood hit the canyon while Squad 6 was moving through a gorge. The water came out of nowhere, a wall of mud and debris. One of the youngest soldiers, a kid named Miller, got pinned under a fallen log, water rising fast. Leg shattered. The radio comms were down due to the storm. The extraction chopper couldn't fly in the wind. The other men were trying to leverage the log, but the mud was sliding. They were losing ground. Sarah wasn't supposed to be there. She was an observer that day, but when she saw the water rising, she didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the ravine, risking her own life. She saw the physics of the jam immediately. It wasn't about strength. It was about leverage. She grabbed a winch cable from their submerged jeep, rigged a pulley system using a standing tree and the torque of the rushing water itself, and directed the men with a calm, terrifying precision. "Heave on 3. Not the arm. Grab the belt. Hayes, anchor your left foot." She stood chest deep in freezing, churning mud for an hour, holding Miller's head above the water while they worked the rig. When they finally pulled him free, seconds before the entire bank collapsed, Sarah was the last one out. She collapsed on the ridge, hypothermic and exhausted. Miller survived. His leg healed. The squad finished their training. On the last day, Commander Hayes handed Sarah a challenge coin and a patch. It wasn't an official military decoration. Civilians couldn't get those easily, but it meant more. It was their unit patch, with the Wraith stitched into the back. "You're part of the team, Sarah," Hayes had said, gripping her hand. "We don't forget. If you ever need us, you make the call." Sarah had put the patch in her jacket and never looked at it again. She went back to changing oil and taking abuse from PTA moms. She never called them. She didn't think a high school graduation counted as an emergency, but apparently someone else did. Back at the graduation, the ceremony was dragging on. The heat was oppressive. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, straining to see the stage. She watched Mrs. Bellamy fan herself for the program, looking bored. She watched the principal, Mr. Higgins. shake hands with the legacy students, the ones whose parents bought the new library wing. Then, it was time for the valedictorian address, and now, Principal Higgins announced, his voice booming over the speakers, our valedictorian, Leo Jenkins. There was polite applause. Nothing raucous. Leo was the scholarship kid, the mechanic's son. He wasn't one of them. Sarah stood up on her toes by the chain-link fence, her heart swelling so big she thought it might crack her ribs. That's my boy, she thought. You show them, Leo. Leo walked to the podium. He looked sharp in his gown, but his face was unreadable. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, scanning the front rows. He paused, he frowned. He scanned again, looking further back, confusion clouding his eyes. He saw the empty seat in the front row, the one marked Jenkins, that was currently being used by Victoria St. Clair's handbag. He looked past the VIP section, past the parents, squinting against the sun, until he saw a tiny figure standing by the dumpsters in the far back. Leo leaned into the microphone. The feedback squealed for a second. I had a speech prepared, Leo said, his voice echoing across the silent field. It was about the future, about how this school gave us the tools to succeed. But I can't give that speech, a murmur went through the crowd. Principal Higgins stepped forward nervously. Leo, stick to the script, he hissed. Leo ignored him. I can't give that speech because looking out at this crowd, I realized that this school didn't teach me the most important lesson. It taught me calculus. It taught me history. But it didn't teach me honor. Because if it had, my mother wouldn't be standing behind a garbage fence right now while a handbag sits in her seat. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the grass. Victoria St. Clair froze, her hand hovering over her purse. My mother, Leo continued, his voice shaking with suppressed rage, who worked 18-hour days to pay for this school, who came home bleeding and burned so I could have books. You moved her to the back. You think she doesn't fit the picture? Cut the mic, Victoria whispered loudly to the principal. Cut it now. But before the principal could move, a sound cut through the air. It was a low, rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a heavy-lift helicopter. But it wasn't coming from the sky. It was the sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. From the parking lot entrance behind Sarah, the gate rattled. A hush fell over the back rows as 6 men walked in. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They weren't wearing dress blues. They were wearing high-end tactical civilian gear, clean, sharp, intimidating. Cargo pants that cost more than a suit, tight t-shirts that strained against muscles built for war, and dark sunglasses. They moved like water, fluid and dangerous. At the front of the V formation was a giant of a man with a graying beard and a scar running down his jaw. Commander Hayes. They walked right past the stunned security guards who didn't dare ask for a ticket. They walked straight up to Sarah, who was standing there with her mouth slightly open. Hayes stopped. He took off his sunglasses. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at the distant stage, then at the VIP section. His eyes narrowed. Ma'am, Hayes said, his voice deep and gravelly. We heard there was an operation today. We heard the Wraith was being compromised. Sarah stuttered. Hayes? What? How did you? Leo emailed us. Hayes grinned. Said you might need backup. Said the terrain was hostile. Hayes turned to his men. Gentlemen, secure the objective. The 6 men surrounded Sarah, not in a threatening way, but in a protective phalanx. Escort formation, Hayes ordered. Let's take the high ground. And then the impossible happened. The squad began to march Sarah down the center aisle. The sea of parents parted. I'm not talking about a polite shuffling of feet. I'm talking about people literally scrambling over each other to get out of the way. When 6 men who look like they eat barbed wire for breakfast walk down an aisle with a purpose, human instinct takes over. They walked with a synchronized cadence, a wall of muscle and discipline, and right in the center. Looking terrified, but holding her head high, was Sarah in her field jacket. They marched straight to the front. Right up to row A. Victoria St. Clair was still sitting there, her handbag occupying the seat reserved for Sarah. She looked up, her mouth gaping like a fish out of water, as Commander Hayes stopped directly in front of her. He loomed over her, blocking out the sun. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He just looked inevitable. "Ma'am," Hayes said, his voice polite but carrying the weight of a tank. "I believe you have something that belongs to our commanding officer." Victoria blinked rapidly. Excuse me, this is the VIP section. Who do you think you are?" Hayes smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We're the cleaning crew, and it looks like there's some trash in Mrs. Jenkins' seat." He didn't touch the bag. He just looked at it. Then one of the other men, a guy with Miller stitched on his gear the kid Sarah had saved from the flood, now a hardened operator, stepped forward. He picked up the expensive designer bag with 2 fingers, like it was a dirty diaper, and gently set it on the grass in the aisle. "Please," Miller gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." Victoria turned a shade of purple that defied the color wheel. She grabbed her bag, looked around for support, realized everyone was staring at her with a mix of horror and awe, and scrambled out of the seat. She scurried to the second row, forcing her husband to move over. Hayes dusted off the chair. He offered a hand to Sarah. "Your seat, ma'am." Sarah sat down. Her hands were trembling. She looked up at Hayes. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "You pulled me out of the mud." "Sarah," Miller said, leaning down, "you pulled all of us out of the mud at some point. You taught us how to see. Least we could do is help you be seen." On the stage, Leo was watching this unfold with tears streaming down his face. He wiped them away, took a deep breath, and turned back to the microphone. The principal was too terrified to cut the feed now. "As I was saying," Leo's voice cracked, then strengthened. "My mother taught me honor. She taught me that strength isn't about what you drive or what you wear. It's about what you do when the storm comes." He pointed at the front row. "Those men down there, they're United States Special Forces, Green Berets. My mom didn't hire them. She didn't ask them to come. They came because years ago, she taught them how to survive in the wild. She saved their lives. She is the toughest, smartest, most honorable person in this entire zip code. And she fixes your cars for a living." Leo looked directly at the principal, then at Victoria. "So keep your diploma. Keep your awards. The only honor I want today is to be her son." Leo stepped back from the podium. He didn't wait for the applause. He walked down the stairs, off the stage, and straight to his mother. For a second, there was silence. Then, the weirdest thing happened. It wasn't the parents who started it. It was the kids, the graduating class. One by one, they stood up. They started clapping. Then they started cheering. It grew into a roar. The parents, realizing which way the wind was blowing, joined in. Even the security guards were clapping. Sarah stood up to hug her son, burying her face in his graduation gown. Hayes and his team stood at attention, snapping a crisp salute not to the flag, but to the grease-stained mechanic in the field jacket. After the ceremony, the dynamic of the entire town shifted in the span of 30 minutes. It was almost comical. The same people who had snubbed Sarah for years were now trying to push through the crowd, to shake her hand. "Oh, Sarah, I've been meaning to bring my Rover in for a tune-up. Sarah, we must do lunch." Sarah ignored them all. She stood by the parking lot with Leo and the squad. Hayes handed Leo a small box. "Graduation present." Hayes grunted. Leo opened it. It was a compass, an old military navigational compass. "Your mom taught us that a map is useless if you don't know where you're standing," Hayes said. "Don't forget where you stand, kid." As they were getting ready to leave, Victoria St. Clair made one last attempt to salvage her dignity. She walked up to the group, flanked by her husband, forcing a tight smile. "Well," she said, her voice high and brittle, "that was certainly theatrical. I hope you realize, Sarah, that this little stunt doesn't change the rules of the club. We have standards." Sarah looked at Victoria, really looked at her. For the first time, she didn't see a powerful gatekeeper. She just saw a sad, insecure woman clutching a handbag like a shield. Sarah smiled. It was the smile of someone who has stared down a grizzly bear and won. "Victoria," Sarah said softly, "I don't want to be in your club. I have my own." She gestured to the 6 elite warriors standing behind her, arms crossed, looking at Victoria like she was a bug on a windshield. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, and walked away. That evening, there was no fancy gala for Leo. They didn't go to the country club. The squad followed Sarah and Leo back to the garage. They pushed the tool chests aside, ordered 20 pizzas, and dragged a cooler of beer into the center of the shop. They sat on tires and bumpers, telling stories until 3 a.m. They told Leo about the time his mom tracked a rogue bear for 3 miles in the dark. They told him about the ravine. They told him that his mom was a legend in the barracks. Leo went off to meet that fall. He became an engineer, brilliant and humble. But the real change happened in Oak Bridge. Sarah kept fixing cars. She didn't change her prices, and she didn't change her clothes. But nobody ever tried to move her seat again. In fact, the next year, at the town council meeting, when the issue of zoning for a new auto shop came up, the council unanimously voted to name the access road Jenkins Way. It turns out, respect is a funny thing. You can demand it, like Victoria, and never get it. Or you can earn it, quietly, in the mud and the grease, until it becomes undeniable. So, here's what I want you to take away from this. We all have a Victoria in our lives, someone who tries to tell us where we sit, someone who judges us by the jacket we wear. Let them play their games. Because while they're worrying about the seating chart, you should be busy building your team. You should be busy being so good, so undeniable, that when your moment comes, you don't have to announce yourself. The heavy boots will do it for you. And to the single moms out there, the ones with grease under their nails and tired eyes, the ones sitting in the back row, we see you. You are the VIPs, and you never know who might be waiting in the wings to have your back. This is your story. Own it. What do you think? Was Leo right to call out the school publicly, or should he have kept the peace? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Stay strong and never let anyone move your seat.